Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The UK's biggest water company, serving a quarter of the population, is tonight on the brink of collapse. The international consortium which owns the business is in talks to secure extra funding. The UK government says it's ready to step in and take over the company in a worst-case scenario.
Thames Water is weighed down by debt and has come under fire for prolific sewage spills. The company loses the equivalent of up to 250 Olympic-sized swimming pools every day from leaking pipes.
Let's talk to Alpesh Patel, a banking analyst and founder of the private equity house Praefinium Partners. Alpesh, good to see you. Welcome. I mean, just to explain to people outside the UK, how did a company which serves a quarter of the UK population get to this?
It's debt. Now remember, this is not a listed company, it's a private company, and they've been running it a bit like a bank. When you look at companies which have got such high debt to market cap or debt to asset ratios, they tend to actually to be banks. And I've been looking at on a database of other companies listed which might have similar ratios, and that's the problem. The debt's just run away, and of course, when you're paying more and more interest on that debt and interest rates rise, that's working against you, and they can't go to the debt market, so they're going to have to go to the capital markets, in other words, shareholders, or the government for a bailout. The other option, which, again, I don't think is going to work, it's too late for it, is actually, instead of nationalizing it, is to privatize it in the public markets. In other words, float the company, but they've left it too late for that, because if they had done that, then they might have had an injection of cash and capital into the company, which would have paid down some of that debt.
It's worth making the point that this is not the only UK water company in trouble. I mean, if it's not financial chaos, as you've been outlining, I mean, they're constantly being accused of polluting UK rivers and their leakages. I mean, what's gone wrong with the industry?
Well, there's a couple of things here. First of all, you've got to remember that, say, if you look at something like a Severn Trent, which is a listed company, if you're a shareholder in Severn Trent, which and in these water companies, 75% of the shareholders are foreign owners. They're sovereign wealth funds like the Qataris or the Emiratis, or indeed the Chinese or the Canadian pension funds. So, yeah, relatively astute investors with deep pockets who are looking after their national interest, because, you know, pensions are in the national interest. Then what you find with these investors is that they have been more than happy to support these companies, but Britain's water pipes are they're old, they're ancient, they go back to Victorian era, and of course you're trying to do a monumental task. And as I say, you've either got debt in order to close those leaks, or you've got the capital markets, and you can't go back to your shareholders and your sovereign wealth funds and do more rights issues and so on. And you can imagine those big funds are a little bit concerned about giving even more money. Then you've got to go to the debt markets, and you've got to pay more and more interest. But yeah, it's an old country. However, having said that, water is not going to be switched off in the way electricity doesn't get switched off either, and our banks don't stop paying customers. The infrastructure, the national infrastructure that the government provides and the regulators provide is pretty solid in terms of ensuring failure does not mean that the customer is left without water.
The UK water companies were flogged off to the private sector a generation ago to a great fanfare. I mean, there seemed at the time to be great excitement in the markets, the promise of a new era. I wonder what this huge business story does to the political landscape and the perception of privatised businesses in the UK.
Well, there's a couple of points here. One is, and I remember when they were privatized, because I was a teenager at the time, it's what got me interested in stocks. It was great. You sort of wrote a check and you got a bigger check back once they floated, and that's why people like me are hated by, you know, hardworking individuals who don't invest in the stock market, because it is a pretty easy way of making money. And then what happened is these privatized companies which were on the stock market became private. The private equity funds took them off the stock market, so they didn't have the level of scrutiny that you might otherwise have, which is why I think actually something like a Severn Trent is up 100% in 5 years for its shareholders and those pension funds and so on, whereas these ones, they were taken over by, dare I say, my colleagues in the private equity business, and I'll let you into a little secret. We're not the nicest people. We will load your companies up with debt. And if you look at the amount of debt that's gone into those, what was it, about 14-odd companies, which were water companies. In 1989, they had zero debt back then. Today, they've got about £54 billion in debt. Over the same period, they've paid about £66 billion in dividends. That much debt, that much dividends? Looks a bit iffy, doesn't it? Well, it's exactly what my colleagues in the private equity industry would do. They'd load up the companies with debt and then they extract as much money as possible. So the problem might be private equity. It might not be privatization as such, because Severn Trent, as I said, for its shareholders, has generated 100% return.
Alpesh, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for that very wickedly frank analysis. Alpesh Patel from Praefinium Partners.